From advertising words to disclosure duties. In the previous section, we learned how even a few words in advertising can create legal exposure under fair housing laws. Now we transition into one of the most critical areas of real estate practice, disclosure. If advertising is about what you say publicly, disclosure is about what you must reveal privately, and sometimes that line is not as clear as agents think. This section introduces a powerful concept. Not all risks are visible, but that does not mean they are not material. The creepy letter scenario, when facts feel unusual. A real-world lawsuit involving what has been called a creepy letter highlights how unusual facts can still create very real legal obligations. In this situation, sellers received a disturbing letter from an unknown individual claiming a connection to the property. After closing, the buyers began receiving similar letters, causing fear, emotional distress, and ultimately impacting their ability to occupy or resell the home. This raises a critical question every agent must be prepared to answer. Just because something is unusual or difficult to categorize, does that mean it is not material? What is a material fact? In Arizona, sellers are required to disclose known facts that materially affect the value of the property and are not readily observable by the buyer. Material facts are not limited to physical defects. They can include anything that would influence a reasonable buyer's decision to purchase, including conditions, events, or circumstances tied to the property. The challenge is that materiality is not always obvious in the moment. It is often clearer in hindsight. Breaking down the scenario. Let's walk through the situation as a real estate professional. If the seller received a letter claiming ownership or possession, would that impact a buyer's decision? Possibly. If the letter contained threatening or disturbing language, would that impact a buyer's decision? Almost certainly. If the issue later prevents the buyer from occupying or reselling the home, does it affect value? Without question. This is where agents must shift their mindset from, "Is this normal?" to, "Could this matter to a buyer?" The risk of non-disclosure. The biggest mistake agents and sellers make is assuming that something is too minor, too strange, or too uncertain to disclose. However, failure to disclose can lead to lawsuits, financial damages, and long-term reputational harm. In many cases, the issue is not just what happened, but what was not disclosed before closing. The golden rule, when in doubt, disclose. The safest and most effective risk management strategy in real estate is simple. When in doubt, disclose. Disclosure protects everyone involved, the seller, the agent, and the buyer. It allows buyers to make informed decisions and reduces the likelihood of disputes after closing. Transparency is not a weakness in negotiations. It is a safeguard against future liability. The agent's independent duty. Even if a seller is hesitant to disclose certain information, the agent has an independent responsibility to ensure that material facts are not concealed. This means you cannot ignore information simply because it is uncomfortable or unclear. Your role is not just to market the property, it is to protect the integrity of the transaction. Expanding the concept, airport noise and external factors. Disclosure is not limited to unusual scenarios like the creepy letter. It also applies to more common external conditions that may impact a property. One example is airport noise. Properties located near airports may be subject to significant noise, flight patterns, or safety zones that affect livability and future use. These are not always visible during a showing, but they can significantly impact a buyer's experience and the property's value. Why location-based disclosure matters. A property may appear perfect on the surface, but still carry limitations due to its location. For example, a property near an airport may be subject to noise disturbances or restrictions that affect how the land can be used or developed. A buyer who is unaware of these factors may later claim that the information should have been disclosed. Zoning versus reality, a hidden risk. Another important concept is the difference between zoning and actual usability. A property may be zoned for residential use, but external factors, such as noise contours or safety zones, may limit what can actually be built or how the property can be used. This creates a hidden risk for buyers who assume zoning tells the full story. As an agent, helping buyers understand this distinction is part of your professional responsibility. Best practices for 2026. Compliance. Ask better questions. Do not assume that unusual situations are irrelevant. Dig deeper and understand the full context. Document everything. If something is disclosed, make sure it is properly documented in writing. Educate your clients. Sellers often rely on your guidance to understand what should be disclosed. Avoid making judgment calls on materiality alone. When unsure, lean toward transparency. bringing it all together. This section ties directly back to everything we've discussed so far. Advertising taught us how to present information. Copyright taught us what we can use. Fair housing taught us what we cannot say. Now disclosure teaches us what we must reveal. Real estate is not just about selling property. It is about managing information. The agents who succeed are the ones who understand that information, when handled properly, builds trust, and when handled poorly, creates liability. Online discussion. Question: why can something unusual, like a creepy letter, still be considered material in a real estate transaction? Answer: because material facts are based on whether the information could affect a buyer's decision or the property's value, not whether the situation is common or typical. Question: what is the biggest risk of failing to disclose information? Answer: the transaction may lead to legal disputes, financial damages, and loss of trust if the buyer later discovers information that should have been disclosed. Question: how does airport noise relate to disclosure obligations? Answer: it is an example of an external factor that may not be obvious but can significantly impact a property's value and use, making it important to disclose.